A warm breeze swept across the sleepy town as Officer James Porter pulled into the station parking lot. His morning ritual was simple: park in the same spot, grab coffee from the break room, and brace himself for another unpredictable day on the force. But today was different. The tension in the air was palpable, and Porter felt it tightening around him like an invisible chain. James was one of the most respected officers in the department. A man of integrity, he had built his career on hard work and compassion for the community he served. His crisp uniform and calm demeanor were a testament to his commitment. But behind the composed exterior, James carried the weight of countless battles, most of which were fought within the walls of his own department. It wasn't the community that made his job difficult. It was Chief Edward Mason. Chief Mason was the kind of leader who thrived on power. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a booming voice, he commanded respect, or perhaps fear. Underneath the polished badge and impeccable record, Mason harbored a dark side. His interactions with Officer Porter were laced with subtle yet cutting remarks. There was always an undercurrent of hostility that James couldn't ignore. It had started small, a dismissive comment here, a condescending tone there. But over time, the harassment escalated. Mason often questioned Porter's decisions publicly, undermining his authority in front of peers. Rumors began swirling about favoritism and double standards within the department. While other officers received praise for their work, Porter found himself scrutinized for the slightest misstep. Despite the challenges, Porter remained steadfast. He knew his role extended beyond wearing a badge. It was about serving justice and protecting the community. Yet, the constant harassment weighed heavily on him. How long could he endure this toxic environment? The breaking point came during a routine briefing. Mason, standing at the front of the room, singled out Porter for a minor paperwork error. The room fell silent as Mason's voice boomed, dripping with disdain. "Sloppy work, Porter. Maybe this isn't the right job for you." Porter clenched his jaw, swallowing the bitter retort that threatened to escape. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, some sympathetic, others indifferent. It wasn't just about the paperwork. It was about control, about Mason asserting his dominance. After the meeting, Officer Linda Harris, a trusted colleague, pulled Porter aside. "You okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "Yeah," Porter lied, his voice tight. "Just another day." But it wasn't just another day. Something inside him had shifted. He was done being a target. It was time to fight back. As Porter walked back to his desk, his mind raced. He knew confronting Mason wouldn't be easy. The chief had connections and influence that extended beyond the department. But Porter also knew he wasn't alone. Whispers of dissatisfaction with Mason's leadership had been growing louder. Perhaps it was time to turn those whispers into a roar. The question was, how? And at what cost? Little did Porter know, the path he was about to embark on would uncover secrets that would shake the department to its core. Mason's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble, revealing a truth far darker than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just a battle for Porter's dignity. It was a fight for justice, for accountability, and for the soul of the department. And he was ready to face it head-on. The following days were marked by a simmering tension that gripped the station. Officer James Porter's resolve had hardened after that humiliating briefing. He was done tolerating Chief Mason's harassment. But standing up against the most powerful man in the department required more than courage. It demanded strategy and allies. Porter began documenting every encounter with Mason. Every disparaging remark, every instance of unjustified criticism, and every instance of policy violations by the chief were carefully noted. His notebook became a repository of evidence, meticulously detailed with dates, times, and witness names. But Porter knew that documentation alone wouldn't be enough. He needed corroboration from his fellow officers. The problem was that Mason's influence loomed large over the department. Many officers, fearing retaliation or career stagnation, turned a blind eye to Mason's behavior. Those who dared to speak out often found themselves reassigned to less desirable posts or burdened with menial tasks. Porter's first step was to approach Officer Linda Harris. She had always been a straight shooter, unafraid to speak her mind. If anyone would back him up, it was her. During a quiet moment in the break room, Porter broached the topic. Linda, I need to ask you something, he said, his voice low. Do you think Mason's treatment of me has crossed the line? Linda hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Honestly? Yeah, I've seen it. But you know how it is around here. No one wants to be the next target. I'm done being his punching bag, Porter said firmly. I'm putting together a case, but I can't do it alone. Will you back me up? Linda's eyes narrowed. You're serious about this, aren't you? Dead serious. After a long pause, Linda nodded. Okay, I'll help. But we need to be smart about this. Mason's not just going to roll over. With Linda on board, Porter felt a renewed sense of determination. They began discreetly gathering statements from other officers. Some were hesitant, their voices tinged with fear, but a few brave souls shared their experiences. A pattern of harassment and misconduct emerged, painting a damning picture of Mason's leadership. As their investigation deepened, Porter and Linda uncovered something unexpected, a trail of financial discrepancies in department records, overtime payouts that didn't match duty logs, procurement contracts awarded without proper bidding processes, and suspicious expenses disguised as operational costs. It was clear that Mason's corruption extended beyond mere harassment. The discovery was a game-changer. What had started as a personal battle for dignity was evolving into a full-blown corruption scandal. But with every revelation, the risks grew. Mason was a seasoned manipulator, adept at covering his tracks. If he caught wind of their investigation, there would be consequences. Porter knew they needed to protect themselves. They reached out to an external agency, the Internal Affairs Division. Anonymously at first, they provided a preliminary dossier of evidence. The response was immediate. Internal Affairs assigned investigator Rachel Monroe, a sharp, no-nonsense officer known for her tenacity. Meeting Monroe in a nondescript coffee shop on the outskirts of town, Porter laid out their findings. We have statements from multiple officers and evidence of financial misconduct, he said. Monroe's expression was unreadable. This is serious. If what you're saying checks out, Mason's going down. But you need to understand, once this goes public, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that? Porter didn't hesitate. We are. As they left the meeting, Porter felt a mix of apprehension and relief. The wheels were in motion. Mason's reign of terror was about to be challenged. But Mason wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. And Porter knew the storm was just beginning. The air was thick with tension as Officer Porter sat in his car outside the precinct. The recent meeting with Internal Affairs had set the wheels of justice in motion, but with that came an undeniable sense of danger. Chief Mason wasn't just a bully. He was a man with deep roots in the system, and uprooting him would come at a cost. Porter knew that if Mason got wind of the investigation, things could spiral out of control fast. So far, Porter and Linda had operated under the radar, but now they had to tread even more carefully. Investigator Monroe had assured them that the investigation would remain discreet, but in a department rife with whispers and divided loyalties, secrets never stayed hidden for long. The first breakthrough came sooner than expected. Monroe called Porter in for a meeting, her tone urgent. I've been digging into the financial records you provided, she said as they sat in a secured conference room. You were right, there's a lot that doesn't add up. But here's the kicker. Mason's been funneling money through a shell company registered under his brother's name. It's classic embezzlement, and the paper trail is damning. Porter's jaw clenched. So we have him? We're close, Monroe said, but we need more. We need proof that ties him directly to the misuse of funds. And I'll need your help to get it. It was a dangerous ask. Accessing the chief's personal records would require getting close, too close. But Porter was all in. What do you need me to do? He asked. Monroe slid a small recording device across the table. You need to get him talking. If we can get him to admit even a fraction of what's going on, it'll be enough to nail him. Porter took the device, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. This was the kind of risk that could end careers, or worse. Back at the station, Porter placed it cool. Mason was his usual self, barking orders and casting judgmental glances across the room. But Porter noticed something different, a nervous edge to the chief's demeanor. Maybe Mason sensed that the walls were closing in. The opportunity came during a routine patrol debrief. Mason pulled Porter aside, his voice low but commanding. "I hear you've been asking questions," he said, his blue eyes narrowing. Porter met his gaze without flinching. "Just doing my job, Chief. Is that so?" Mason's tone dripped with suspicion. "You'd do well to remember who runs this department, Porter." The threat was clear, but Porter kept his composure. "Noted, Chief." As Mason walked away, Porter's heart raced. The chief was onto him, but that only made him more determined. Over the next few days, Porter carefully maneuvered his way into conversations with Mason, subtly steering the topics toward department finances. It was a delicate dance, but Porter knew how to play the game. Finally, during a particularly heated exchange, Mason let his guard down. "They don't know how things work around here," Mason muttered, his voice low but venomous. "Sometimes you have to move money around to keep the department running. Nobody needs to know the details." Porter's pulse quickened. "But isn't that risky? I mean, what if someone finds out?" Mason scoffed. "They won't. I've been doing this for years, and no one's ever had the guts to challenge me. Not until you, apparently." The recording was crystal clear. That night, Porter met Monroe in a secluded parking lot. He handed her the recording, his expression grim. "This is it," he said. Monroe listened, her face hardening. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "He's finished." But Porter knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Mason wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, chaos erupted at the precinct. Internal Affairs had launched a full-scale raid, seizing files and computers. Officers stood by, wide-eyed and murmuring among themselves. Mason stormed out of his office, his face flushed with fury. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed. "You're all going to regret this." But his bluster fell on deaf ears. Monroe and her team were methodical, leaving no stone unturned. As Mason was led away in handcuffs, the weight of years of corruption finally crashing down on him, Porter felt a surge of vindication. Justice had been served, but it came at a cost. "You did it," Linda said, standing beside him. "We did it." Porter nodded, his expression somber. "Yeah, but this is just the beginning. We have to rebuild trust, not just in the department but with the community." Linda's eyes softened. "And we will." The storm had passed, but the scars remained. Still, there was hope, a hope that things could finally change. The precinct was eerily quiet the day after Chief Mason's arrest. Desks that were usually bustling with activity now stood empty as officers processed the gravity of what had just happened. Mason had been the face of the department for over a decade, and now that face was plastered across news outlets, handcuffed and humiliated. Porter sat in the break room, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The weight of what he had accomplished was still sinking in. He had stood up to a man who wielded immense power, and against all odds, justice had prevailed. But victory came with mixed emotions. Mason's downfall exposed the corruption festering within the department, and that wound would take time to heal. Linda walked in, dropping into the seat across from him. "You okay?" she asked. Porter gave a half-smile. "Honestly, I don't know. Feels weird. You know, like we won. But it doesn't really feel like a win." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. But look around, James. People are talking. Really talking. That's something that never happened when Mason was in charge." She was right. Officers who had once walked on eggshells were now opening up about their experiences. Conversations about reform and accountability filled the air. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. A few weeks later, an interim chief was appointed, Captain Maria Alvarez, a no-nonsense leader known for her integrity and commitment to justice. Her first order of business was to hold a department-wide meeting. As the officers gathered in the briefing room, Alvarez stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet approachable. "I'm not here to sugarcoat things," she began. "What happened with Chief Mason was a betrayal of everything this department stands for. But we have a choice. Stay stuck in the past or build a better future." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm instituting new protocols for accountability and transparency," Alvarez continued. "This department will operate on the principles of justice and fairness, not favoritism or corruption. And that starts today." There was a ripple of murmurs among the officers. Some were skeptical, others hopeful. Porter could see that the path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Alvarez's reforms included regular town hall meetings with the community, an independent oversight committee, and a renewed focus on diversity and inclusion within the force. Porter was tasked with leading a new mentorship program for junior officers, aimed at fostering a culture of respect and collaboration. At the first mentorship session, Porter stood before a group of wide-eyed rookies. "I won't lie to you," he said. "This job isn't easy, and sometimes you'll face challenges that test your integrity. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it's hard." The rookies nodded, their expressions serious. Porter felt a sense of purpose reigniting within him. Maybe this was what redemption looked like, not just for him, but for the entire department. Meanwhile, Mason's trial became a media spectacle. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his attempts to shift blame fell flat. Former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged down with him. Porter was called to testify, his testimony a key component in the case. As he sat on the witness stand, facing Mason for the first time since the arrest, he felt a surge of resolve. "Officer Porter," the prosecutor said, "why did you choose to speak out against Chief Mason?" Porter met Mason's glare head-on. "Because it was the right thing to do. No one is above the law, not even the chief of police." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Mason was found guilty on multiple charges, including embezzlement and misconduct. As he was led away, Porter felt a sense of closure. The man who had once tormented him was now facing the consequences of his actions. Back at the precinct, life slowly returned to a new normal. There were still challenges, but there was also progress. Officers who had once stayed silent were now speaking up, and the community's trust in the department was gradually being rebuilt. One evening, as Porter walked to his car, Alvarez approached him. "Good work today," she said. "You've been instrumental in turning things around here." "Thanks, Chief," Porter said. "But it's a team effort." "True," Alvarez agreed. "But every team needs someone willing to lead by example. And that's you." Porter watched as she walked away, her words echoing in his mind. He had never sought to be a leader, but sometimes leadership found you when you least expected it. As he drove home, the city lights stretching out before him, Porter felt a sense of peace. The road had been long and filled with obstacles, but he had emerged stronger. The department was changing, and so was he. And for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt real. The precinct had undergone a transformation in the months following Chief Mason's conviction. What was once a place dominated by fear and favoritism had become a beacon of reform and accountability. Under Chief Alvarez's leadership, new policies were firmly in place, ones that emphasized transparency, fairness, and community engagement. Officer James Porter's role in this transformation did not go unnoticed. His courage had not only toppled a corrupt leader, but had also inspired a cultural shift within the department. As he walked through the precinct now, he was greeted with nods of respect, not just from his peers, but from senior officers who once doubted him. The department's relationship with the community had also seen a significant shift. The wounds caused by years of corruption and abuse of power didn't heal overnight, but tangible steps were being taken to mend them. Community police town halls became a regular event, fostering open dialogue and understanding. Porter was often invited to speak at these gatherings, sharing his story and listening to the concerns of residents. One evening, during a particularly packed town hall, a middle-aged man stood up. His voice was steady but emotional. "Officer Porter," he said, "I just want to thank you. People like me, we didn't trust the police for a long time. But seeing what you did, it gave us hope. You showed us that there are good cops who care about justice." The room erupted in applause, and Porter felt a lump form in his throat. He had never sought recognition, but moments like this made every struggle worthwhile. Back at the station, Linda Harris leaned against Porter's desk, grinning. "You're a local hero now, huh?" she teased. Porter chuckled. "Yeah, well, I'd rather be catching bad guys than giving speeches." "Too late for that," Linda said. "You're the poster boy for reform." Porter shook his head, amused but grateful. "I guess there are worse things to be known for." Linda's expression turned serious. We've come a long way. But there's still work to do. Always, Porter agreed. But at least now we're moving in the right direction. The long-term impact of Mason's downfall extended beyond the precinct. His conviction sent a clear message throughout the city. Corruption wouldn't be tolerated. Other departments took note, implementing their own reforms to ensure accountability. The ripple effect was undeniable. Porter was approached by advocacy groups and even local universities to share his experiences. Reluctantly at first, he agreed, recognizing the importance of spreading the message that integrity and courage could drive meaningful change. In one lecture hall filled with eager students, Porter stood at the podium. "I'm not here to sugarcoat anything," he began. "Law enforcement is a tough job, but it's also a job that demands accountability. If you ever find yourself at a crossroads, remember this. Doing the right thing might cost you in the short term, but it's always worth it in the long run." The students hung on his every word, and Porter realized that perhaps his story could inspire the next generation to uphold justice with integrity. One afternoon, Monroe from Internal Affairs paid a visit to the precinct. She found Porter at his desk, going over case files. "Monroe," Porter greeted, surprised. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to check in," she said, pulling up a chair. "See how things are going." "Better," Porter said. "A lot better, thanks to you." Monroe smiled faintly. "You did the hard part, Porter. I just followed the trail you laid out." There was a pause before she added, "Cases like Mason's don't come around often. But when they do, it takes someone with guts to see them through." "I'm glad it was you." Porter felt a swell of pride. "Thanks, Monroe. That means a lot." As she left, Porter reflected on how far they had come. The station was no longer a place shrouded in corruption, but a place where justice and integrity thrived. Years later, Porter stood at the graduation ceremony of the newest batch of police recruits. Chief Alvarez had invited him as a guest speaker. As he looked out at the eager faces before him, he took a deep breath. "When I started this job, I thought being a cop was just about enforcing the law," he said. "But I've learned that it's so much more than that. It's about serving your community, standing up for what's right, and never losing sight of your integrity, even when it's hard." The recruits listened intently, their expressions serious. "You'll face challenges," Porter continued. "But remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it." The room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Porter smiled, knowing that the future was in good hands. As the ceremony ended, Porter stood by the precinct steps, watching the recruits mingle with their families. Linda joined him, a warm smile on her face. "You did good, James," she said. "We did good," Porter corrected. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. The road had been long and filled with obstacles, but they had emerged stronger, their resolve unshaken. Change was never easy, but it was always worth fighting for. And Porter knew that as long as people stood up for what was right, there would always be hope.